Welcome to Shooting Straight with A1F.com. I'm Frank Miniter, the editor-in-chief of the NRA's America's First Freedom. Now, today we're speaking to Stephen Hunter again. If you haven't read his novels, his Bob Lee Swagger thrillers, all 12 of them, you're lucky because you get to go and begin them right now. They're fantastic. He wrote a feature for us recently on Bob Lee Swagger because Swagger is the ultimate gun guy, and that's a projection out of Steve being a pretty cool gun guy himself. So I wanted to get right into this, Steve, with you on this character, how you developed him. I mean, you taught me a lot. I've written a couple of thrillers. You've been very kind to blurb them, and I learned a lot from you on this. I looked at guns and how do I bring guns into my hero's hand? How do I have them in a scene? I don't want them, and you've told me this. Don't mythologize them. Don't act like they're more than they are. Guns are normal. They should be treated that way. They're tools of freedom, as we put it here at America's First Freedom. So treat them as such. Treat them seriously, but don't overemphasize them just because one enters the scene. So you've taught me that for sure. But when you developed this character, how did you begin? Where did it come from? People say that his character is based off of a Vietnam-era sniper, Hathcock. Is that true? And what got you started?
I was looking for a book to write, and I'd failed at a couple of other books. I had published a few books, but nothing was really happening with my career. And I wanted a book that would be easy to organize and a book about a sniper. You always know what the issue is. You always know who the good guy is. You always know who the bad guy is. It wasn't inclined to be uh, full of nuance and suggestion. It was going to be very direct, and you could keep it pointed in the same direction. At the time, I didn't know much about rifles except what I'd seen in the movies. And so I bought a Remington Police 700 in 308. And one of the things that happened while I was writing that book was that I was also learning the rifle. I can't say I became a good shot. I can't say I'm a great shot even today. I'm a little bit better than mediocre. But writing the book and learning the rifle simultaneously made me think about things that aren't normally thought about and that are taken for granted. How do you interface with the gun? How do you feel with the gun? How is the gun as a physical presence in your life? How what does the gun smell like? What does the gun look like? It's not just a gun, it's an object of some singularity, and your interactions with it are going to be complex, but they can't be sentimentalized and they can't be made mythological. You've always got to keep the vernacular in the practical. And I wanted to, so that was kind of my guideline, my interior guideline. At the same time, I have to say, I was an old time uh, lover of the culture and the history of it, and I wanted to get some of the old red gods in, if you will. And if you recall, there's a someone is looking for a Model 70 in 300 H&H with a heavy barrel. The truth is, I can't even remember, and I that gun sort of represented to my imagination, and it stimulated me the sort of the heritage, the culture, the men who've come before. So I had the practical and the nostalgic in the book at the same time, sort of each one highlighting or accenting the other. And I don't know why. I don't know how. I just know that I worked on it for a very long time. And at one point, I threw out 300 pages. And at another point, I had totally given up on it. But somehow it all came together in the end. And, you know, I don't even. I don't even feel like I'm the author because to me it was this sort of groping struggle, this sort of night walk, just bumping into things in the dark. And uh, it it seemed to turn out okay is the only thing. I was surprised how well it turned out, and I'm pleased that it became the foundation of a later career. And I suppose I'm pleased that people still, 30 years later, think it's my best book. Well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but it's the book that got most people into Bob Lee Swagger, and I'm certainly glad I did it, and I remain very proud of it.
I think you're being modest because this character, there's a ton of nuance in him, and you develop him over a lot of thrillers. I think he's a character too that most NRA members would certainly get, and he resonates as true and honest to a crowd that knows what this character is and where he comes from and his experience with guns and in the military. It just makes sense. But to larger society, to popular culture today, and certainly to our mainstream media, he's something different. There's not something they would understand. There's something they would have to discover page by page as they find out about this kind of guy, Bob Lee's swagger.
Well, I that was again one of the ideas. The book was written in the early '90s. It's the height of really, or is one of the heights. You know how it comes in waves and goes in waves, but it was one of the big waves of anti-gun sentiment everywhere. Clinton had just passed the 10-year big magazine ban. Everywhere I saw, gun owners were being represented as Neanderthalic rednecks with dragging their knuckles and breathing through their mouths and saying things like, you know, kill them all, let God sort them out. And we were being associated with right-wing kooks and fanatics, and we were being essentially exiled. We were being banished from our own culture. And I thought that was wrong. So I decided, I mean, the challenge to me was to take a gun guy who on the outside was everything that people were being taught to hate, and go inside him and see what really made him tick and show his nobility, his intelligence. He's not stupid. They think we're stupid, and it shows how stupid they are. And you know, his commitment to his discipline, his skill, but his also his very careful nurturing of his skill and never taking anything for granted. I wanted to give him what I would call a sense of country sly. By that I mean he's a lot smarter than a lot of people think he is, and he's just you know, they're thinking 2 jumps ahead, but he's thinking 4 jumps ahead. And doing that aspect of the book was a great deal of fun for me. And I wanted him to be Southern. I wanted him to have a twang. I wanted him to live in a trailer. I wanted him to have a dog. You know, I wanted him to wear a baseball cap. I just had in mind all the totems of totems of the gun nut, except the gun nut was the smartest and the bravest and the most committed to duty of all the supposedly smarter and more sophisticated people he was doing business with. And the overall arc of the series has been, it illustrates a myth that exists nowhere except in my mind, and that is the myth of the usurped prince or the usurped nobleman. In a normal society, he would be a god, but of because of people at headquarters or in the capital city, because of schemers and plotters and a variety of mendacious characters, he's been denied the his place in society and his role in society and his importance to society. And the book has traced his arc back to that role. I mean, when it starts, he's an ex-drunk living alone in in a trailer with some some shameful episodes in the past when he came back from Vietnam. He's a drunk for 10 years, but when it ends, he's a member of society, community, and of the and people understand what he stands for. And this book targeted is sort of the apotheosis of all that. It makes it explicit and in some senses political. And I had great fun doing it, as you might imagine.
Well, this generation, especially, I mean, the TikTok generation, the Instagram generation, they're putting themselves out there constantly, and there's no secrets with them. Everything is supposed to be out for everyone to look at and to click on and say, "Isn't this so great?" Give you a thumbs up. But a character like Swagger, he's not going to tell you what his philosophy is. It's there, and he'll show you if you watch his actions, but you have to watch him closely. He isn't going to sit there and brag. That's beneath him. He's just not going to do it.
Well, that's very good. I wanted him also to be taciturn and not a man who exposed his emotions and his thoughts a lot. Because one of my extremely radical beliefs is that he's repressed. He's not a guy who lets it flow, who lets it go, who expresses his emotions at the drop of a pin. My belief is that repression is civilization. I mean, I don't know, in the 60s, we turned against repression, but everything we have, everything we are, everything we do, everything we use, all of that was built on repression. We hid our violent instincts, we hid our sexual instincts, we controlled them, and we took that energy and we devoted it to work and development and to duty. And that's really the secret of human life. And so in one grandiloquent sense, the books are an argument in favor of repression, of holding it in, of disciplining the self. And he's not interested in letting it all hang out. And he doesn't like people who let it all hang out. He likes other people like himself, who's been there, done that, have had terrifying experiences in battle, but don't come home and expect a lot of attention for it and a lot of sympathy. Don't seek sympathy, just want to live their lives in accordance to their own code. And I think people, whether they agree with that concept or not, at least respect it. And that's partly the reason the books have been successful.
That's a deep part of America that's still there, but it's not often in Hollywood. And you've had brushes with Hollywood, not just brushes. You've had whole projects done in Hollywood. Shooter, the film with Mark Wahlberg, and then the TV series named Shooter. How did your character then? Do you think it was an honest portrayal of your character, as it was pulled into popular culture?
Well, that's a hard question for me to answer. Not exactly, but because of the cultural politics involved. Mark Wahlberg, that movie happened because Mark liked the script and then he liked the book. So I owe him a great deal of
He
gratitude.
seems like a real good, an honest dude. It's what he is.
Of repression is honoring the patron. The people that help you, you owe them loyalty. You can't turn on that. So I might have private feelings about the way the movie turned out, but I'm probably not going to express them, except among close friends. You and I get together with a bottle of bourbon, I'll be happy to tell you all about it. But I mean, I can only say that they did the best they could, and they did some things very well. The gun handling is very good in that movie. And in fact, I think the reason it's still popular and almost a cult movie is because people see it and even if they don't know exactly what they're seeing, they know that there's something different about it. And that's because they all know how to shoot. The shooting is very realistic. The gun handling is very realistic. The postures of the men with the guns is very realistic, and there's not a lot of extraneous click click. Every Hollywood movie, click click. They're clicking their guns every damn minute. There's not a lot of that, and people, even if they can't articulate it, no movie critic was able to articulate it. They understand that they're seeing something that's a little bit different. Now, I'm not crazy about, I will say this, because I said it to them, I wasn't crazy about the way it ended. That ending was patched on late. They thought the first ending, which is much closer to my book, didn't work. And they panicked and they shot this episode of Bob kicking down the door of, of a hunting lodge. I don't know where all the capitalists out of Bertolt Brecht are sitting around drinking whiskey out of crystal glasses, and he executes them all. I didn't find that particularly appealing. That's not Bob Lee's character. He's not a murderer. He's not a point blank shooter. He is a military, well-trained professional, and he shoots only those who could shoot him or are about to shoot someone else. and he has that code that he adheres to, even at the cost of his life or at the cost of serious damage. And so, that's what I was trying to get at. And again, it seems to have worked on some quiet level. People may not exactly know what's different, but they get that there's something different. And there's also another thing, a sexual thing. He is not a guy who's always grabbing and betting women. I don't know. In the movies that happens all the time. I'm so divorced from real life. Maybe it does happen all the time, but it's not. In my life or in the lives I know of, when you get married, that's pretty much it, and you're not. You're not coming on, and you're not making. You're not trying to woo the chicks in every other sequence, and I think that I think people pick up on that too, and have a kind of a little bit of respect for it, as opposed to some of the other guys who are just as much, playboys as they are action heroes.
He has a deep ethic, and I think actually it reminds me of Raymond Chandler's Philip Marlowe, and that you discover book by book he's not slaying women and using guns in funny ways, and he's out there and he's real, and he's not often preaching his philosophy. You just find it through his actions as those books go on. I found the same in Swagger.
Well, thank you so much. Being compared to Raymond Chandler certainly made my day and maybe my week. He was a great writer, and you're exactly right about that. Not a lot of talk about the self. Focus on the professional issue before him and his attitudes towards the people who are on his side or who are on the other side, and on the plots, which are so enormously Byzantine. Even screenwriters had trouble figuring them out when they were trying to adopt the books. Um, but he was a great writer, and what he had that I don't have, though it does appeal to me. He had a sense of place, and if you would know of Southern California, you must read Raymond Chandler. Well, my place is a fantasy place. It's my image of Polk County, Arkansas. I haven't spent much time there, but kind of uh, it's kind of a fantasy derivation of my father's Missouri family, which was old uh, landed gentry with lots of scandals and black sheep in the family, fortunes made and lost. Sometimes they were washed out by floods and the great New Madrid earthquake of 1828 cost them and me a fortune, but they prevailed somehow. And we would visit them when I was very young, and it's so odd that all these years and years later, when I'm working on these books, little flashbacks, little images, little characters, little details would come gushing up from that just when I needed them. And again, I'm certainly no William Faulkner, but the family aspect of the Swaggers is something you never in a million years could have told me I would have done. But I found it very enjoyable. It was just fascinating to me. And sometimes the characters knew more about the family than I did. And they would tell me. I had no idea that the lawyer Sam and I can't remember Connie, what her relationship was. She was another. I couldn't remember that they were having an affair because Connie's husband, a rich guy, was no good, and they told me that they were. And suddenly, when they told me they were, that the whole thing made a lot more sense. And it was, as I say, it was a journey of discovery, and discovery means stimulation. Stimulation means energy. Energy means at the end of the day, I get the damn book done.
Well, as an author, you can easily get lost in all those details, all that background. I know in my first attempts to write these kind of books, I certainly got lost and just threw them away. And I didn't find my way until I saw Ray Bradbury in an interview. Actually, he was asked how he wrote Fahrenheit 451, and he said that he got to know his character over a long time. And then one day he was frustrated with it, and he just decided to ask his character what he wanted. And the character, Montag, just said, "Well, I don't want to burn books anymore." So then Ray Bradbury says to him, "Well, why don't you go do something about it?" And Bradbury says then he just followed his character around whatever he did and just wrote it down and just pulled himself back from that kind of action.
I understand that. Believe me, that is what happens. They do develop a will of their own. I know it's a delusion. You're telling yourself that they're doing it on their own, when really it's your subconscious that's manipulating them. And yet, from the user end or from the respondent's end, it feels authentically as if they're there and they're calling the shots. And uh, and that's one of the great things about our business is when that happens, and they go, they make the discoveries. You're just writing and it comes out and it's better than if you had planned it, or maybe it's different than what you had planned. And I think it was the best explanation of it's very short. Kurt Vonnegut, in a book of short stories, in the introduction, he had one explanation for all the technical questions, and that is, he said, "When I write, I become what I seemingly must become," and that's it. I mean, it's an issue of becoming. The deeper you get into it, the more that's the reality of your life, and the real reality of your life is much less it's much less noticeable. I mean, as a movie critic, I had many experiences where I'd be sitting in a movie and all of a sudden an idea about a character or an idea about a plot move or an idea about an action sequence would pop into my brain and totally occupy me for 5, 10, 15 minutes. And then I'd shake it off and realize I completely lost contact with the movie, and I had no idea, what movie it was. And I'd sort of have to bluff my way through a review. And believe me, it wouldn't be the first time a movie critic bluffed his way through a review. But it sort of takes over, and that's if you're interested in the final product, that's a good thing, not a bad thing. If you're interested in domestic accord and getting your chores done, it's a bad thing. So it just depends on what your priorities are. I always thought it was a good thing.
Well, Targeted just came out, and from what I'm seeing, it did very well. I thoroughly enjoyed it. What's next for you?
A book that I'm very proud of. I think it's one of the best things I've done. Um, it's called The Bullet Garden, and it allowed me to finally. I found a publisher and editor very enthusiastic about it, who allowed me to do this. I tried to sell it to several people several times, and no one was interested in. Very dispiriting experience. See, it's not all roses and honeysuckle. And finally, Emily Bessler of Simon and Schuster took it, and it's set in my favorite time period, which is World War II. And it's a very deep wallow in the culture and the times of World War II. It's set in Normandy in late June and early July to August of 1944. And if you know your World War II history, that was the Battle of Normandy, which is pretty much forgotten, but it was a really tough battle. And one of the reasons it was so tough was because of snipers. The German snipers exacted a terrible toll on American forces in what was called the Bocage, which is it's a beautiful region of hedgerows and crooked little roads and small hills, and it's ideal sniper territory. And so my book is a fictional description of how some American intelligence people, under the leadership of a certain person, are able to come to terms with and defeat or at least break the spirit of the German sniper campaign. And that person is Earl Swagger. I'm so happy to return Earl. You may think, you may say, wait a minute, Earl's in the Marines. He was in the Pacific. Well, yes and no. We were able to break some rules and figure out a way to get him to Normandy without any without it seeming too preposterous. And as I say, I think it works out very well. And if people like Earl, I think they will. This is Earl's best book, and I think that, see, this is family again, and I think that this will really punch their ticket.
Well, I wouldn't think you used the same voice used in Basil's War, which was just a fantastic read, given that it's Earl Swagger. It must be a simpler or more austere kind of voice.
Well, it is, but I make the point that Earl is really bilingual, and his one of his languages Marine NCO, and the other of his language is the language he is brought up to, which is bourgeois American, and he can, without a whole lot of effort, get rid of the Marine patois and speak coherent, non-folksy English in which all the verbs agree with all all the tenses and all the verbs are generally right, and he becomes that man when he's dealing with. And in fact, there you're right; it's in a different voice. However, there's a lot of interaction with the British. Much of it is set in London in that period, 1944. It's before the V2s, but it was not before the buzz bombs. And there's a lot of machinations going on at OSS headquarters at 70 Grosvenor Square in Mayfair, and I bring in a lot of historical. I had great fun coming up with cameos to get guest appearances by people out of other books and people out of history and authors I admire. And so for me, it was just a festival. It was just maybe, maybe it'll be an utter failure because it's nothing but self-indulgence, and that does happen a lot. They always, a young director has a hit, he gets to make any movie he wants to, so he makes the movie he's always dreamed of making, and it's a disaster. Maybe that'll happen here. I don't think so. I think it's a pretty good book, The Bullet Garden.
I'm looking forward to it. Hearing your passion about it, I'm really looking forward to it. Make sure we get a review copy.
Oh, absolutely.
So where can people find your books, connect with you?
Oh, the books are everywhere. Simon and Schuster published this one, published Targeted. You can get it on Amazon or Barnes and Noble, or any bookstore should have it. The books, I understand. I don't have figures. I don't have up-to-date intelligence, but the signs are that it's actually doing pretty well. I thought it would do better, but you always think they'll do better. And I'm glad it's doing as well as it's doing. And as long as they do pretty well, I'll be able to stay in this game, which I've actually been in, I realize now, 42 years.
Wow.
So, seems like only yesterday, but here I am. Somehow I turned into an old man. I can't remember when that happened, but it seems to have happened.
Well, thank you, Steve.
Thank you very much, Frank, and thank you for your support and the great attention you've paid to me.